excited about this panel. I am going to turn it over to Joe Devlin. Take it away.
Awesome. Are we live now, Susan?
Yes, we are. We're recording and we're going.
Hey, how about that? Welcome. Thank you. We have certainly an esteemed group of panelists today to discuss taxation in the cannabis industry. We have with us today State Treasurer Fiona Ma, Nick Madros, who's the director of CDTFA, Mayor Pro Tem John Stevens of Costa Mesa. Adam, I'm going to mispronounce your last name.
Hijazi.
One more time?
Hijazi.
Yeah, wouldn't have gotten that. Appreciate that, though. And one anonymous, we'll call him a legacy operator, illicit market operator, but we certainly have a great group of folks here. If you're not familiar with what the state treasurer and the director of CDTFA does, in a nutshell, the state treasurer has a wide range of responsibilities, including overseeing the state's pooled money investment firm. She chairs and sits on a number of investment boards, and certainly influential in California monetary policy. Nick is the director of CDTFA. He oversees the department which collects all of our state's tax revenue, and is often the case of regulators. They don't necessarily get to directly shape policy, but they certainly are the implementers of it and certainly are influencers of it. As a former regulator myself, I've had now a full 360-degree view on the cannabis issue. And what I think we might hear of is of folks in the industry saying, you know, the taxes are too high, and it's unsustainable. It's maybe fueling the illicit market. I just wanted to maybe set the table with what Prop 64 did set out. And if you go into the stated intent of Prop 64, the A, listed of like A through like T, was to take non-medical marijuana production and sales out of the hands of the illegal market and bring them under and into a regulatory structure that prevents access to minors. So really one of the intents of Prop 64 was certainly not just to collect revenue, but was also to transition or bring those folks that are operating in that market currently into a regulated market. So with that, my first question would be to State Treasurer Ma and Nick. Regardless of the cause of tax structures adopted in Prop 64, any misalignment with stated intent, you know, what are, as you see it, what role does taxation play in affecting both the legal marketplace and the illicit marketplace?
Hi, Joe. Maybe I'll start since I've been actively following and supporting the cannabis industry since I was on the State Board of Equalization from 2014 to 2018. So I think many of us could agree or will agree or probably agree that the taxes are too high in Prop 64. And unfortunately, when initiatives are passed on the ballot, if an initiative puts specific amounts, whether it's dollar amounts or tax amounts, the only way to change those amounts is by going back to the ballot. The legislature has been trying to at least suspend the cultivation tax for 3 years and reduce the excise tax from 15% to 11% over the last couple years. I was a sponsor of both the Bonta bill, AB 286, and also this year's AB 1948, which did not get to the governor's desk this year. But when you create a big tax inequity, especially when there is no enforcement, then that propels the illicit market to better compete against those licensed cannabis operators who are obeying the laws, right? Filing all the forms, paying all the fees, paying all the taxes, and making sure they do it within the deadline. Yet there's very little enforcement for those that are not complying by the laws. And that's kind of a problem right now, especially during COVID. As I know, we usually go and do desk audits of affordable housing developers and developments, and we haven't been able to do that during COVID-19. So enforcement, I think, has also been impacted by COVID-19, but still, we need to, until we better enforce those illicit operators, there's still going to be that, differential between the legal and the illegal, and it's going to continue to cause problems because, those that are trying to do the right thing are kind of almost getting penalized, and those who are not getting penalized and are making more money during this time.
Thank you. I guess maybe to Adam or Alex, are you seeing any impact whatsoever, or I guess what is the impact on the illicit market, kind of thus far? Are we starting to transition it, or is it really alive and well?
Well, this is Alex, and as a legacy market operator, it's alive and well. You're not going to discourage people from trying to earn a living, especially in times of COVID when there's no stimulus or any real avenue for people to provide a living for their families. I think if you're going to really be serious about that, you need to think about how to incentivize and provide a pathway for people to join the legal market and pay their taxes. As a legacy operator, I've paid taxes for years and never had the benefit of any sort of legitimacy. And I'm speaking for myself here. If we're going to be talking about enforcement actions, I think we also need to couple that with some efforts to bring in these legacy operators who've been the market. We're the ones that broke this market. We're the ones that sacrificed and bled to get things to where they are now. And largely the industry has been taken out from underneath those people.
Well, this is Adam, and completely understand. So I've been in the cannabis industry actively since late 2009, 2010. So I had the opportunity to operate on both sides of the regulation before Prop 64 and after. During the time, we're here in the city of Long Beach, the city passed its first ordinance, and we went through that ordinance. And commercialized cannabis has caused a lot of unintended consequences. Where at the time, the taxation, getting it out of the illicit market, transitioning into a legal market, was on the forefront of the thought for everybody, and we get the intention. But with some of the intended consequences right now that you deal with is we have one item, and this item has multiple layers of taxes on it at the end of the day when it reaches the consumer. And it is high cost of regulations. We have a lot of fees that we pay outside of the taxes. Also down here in Long Beach, we're proud to say that we're also unionized, so we pay livable wages. We have workman's comp, we have insurances, we have so many different expenses. And so the legal market is really hedged, it's pegged against itself. And a lot of the legacy operators, and which I consider myself a legacy operator as well, because during that time, if it wasn't for our unique situation, there was no way I would have been part of this industry today. We stuck out through the years, and because we had a status from before, we were able to come back into the market. For a lot of operators today, it is extremely hard, and we deal with this because we have about 265 applications in the city of Long Beach, but only 15% of them are operational. So even amongst, if you get out of the barriers, how many people are actually getting through the process? So it is problematic. And when you the taxes must, at a time it was about safe and affordable access. It was always about safe and affordable access. Then of course we want to regulate the industry, and the affordable has definitely been taken out. And I think there could be some solutions. We're California, we lead, and we should. There's ideas of, yes, those, and thank you, Secretary Treasury Ma, for those bills. Are awesome, and those gave some sort of sliver of hope for the industry at that time, and it didn't go through. But I think today more than ever, it's extremely important, at least for 3 years. Let's get more people involved in the industry. Let's get more of the consumers into the industry, and do some sort of economic study to say. But I'll keep it at that. But so thank you.
Nick, Prop 64 promised the voters hundreds of millions of dollars in tax revenue. Can you maybe give a update, kind of overview of kind of what that tax is kind of actually materialized into?
Sure. So CDTFA, as you mentioned, we administer 3 state taxes that relate to cannabis: the cultivation tax, the excise tax, and then the sales and use tax, which applies to all sales of tangible personal property in the state of California. In 2018, in those 3 taxes, the state brought in just shy of $400 million in tax. Last year, it was about $635 million, and this year we're on track. If the third and fourth quarters follow the first and second quarters, we're on track for just north of $800 million in state tax from those 3 taxes. And as was mentioned, we administer the tax, so the rate is not ours to set. And if the state's lawmakers determine that it should be lower or higher, we will administer it however they determine. So, we're really agnostic on that point. As the treasurer mentioned, one of the complicating factors here is that the rates were very explicitly set in Prop 64. So you need a supermajority to adjust those.
Yeah, and does that tax include any of the local tax that's being collected? I mean, does CDTFA collect that tax and remit that to the locals, or is that?
Well, a portion of the sales tax goes back to the locals, but the local business taxes that jurisdictions have put specifically on cannabis sales, we do not administer those for the locals.
Right. So it seems like that maybe Prop 64 is, at least delivered in part on its promise to deliver hundreds of millions of dollars of tax revenue. We still only have a portion of the cities and counties online with a regulated industry. So there's certainly still opportunity there for growth. Has your office run any projections as to, at its kind of current growth rate, or what does that look like? Or when 2/3 of the cities and counties have a regulated industry? I mean, are we looking into the billions of dollars at this point?
It's hard to know. We don't know what we don't know. So there are estimates about what percentage of the market is underground versus legal, and we've heard some figures here today. It's in a way unknowable. I don't think you're looking at billions and billions if everybody comes in, but and I think clearly we've got some portions of the state where there's a much bigger problem, where at least our enforcement teams are finding a much bigger problem with unlicensed operators than in other parts of the state. So that's.
And I do want to get to the enforcement kind of end of this, but before Treasurer Ma has to go, if you could maybe just share your thoughts on what the opportunities may be and kind of what's that path look to move forward if in fact the state is meeting its promise of Prop 64 of delivering hundreds of millions of dollars to the state, but the industry is screaming that it's unsustainable, and we haven't scratched the surface of 280E. you know, what's a potential path forward for kind of like, I guess, resetting that tax structure and bringing maybe the local governments into this, because we also have to kind of leave room for them as well. Is there a path forward, and what would that look like?
Well, I think when we authored AB 286, right, the first time 3 years ago, many of the legislators said, oh, it's too early. We don't know what the impact is going to be. We don't know how much revenues Prop 64 is going to generate, and we should let the system work. So we did sponsor it again this year. And again, all of you said, yes, it is still too high. And some of the legislators have been meeting. I know Evan Lowe convened a group in Oakland. And so more people are understanding how high the taxes are, but it really depends also on the industry and the stakeholders to let your legislators know. I'm a big fan of working groups. I oversee the affordable housing tax credits, and we have a 35-member stakeholder working group. And it's very diverse. They convene, they listen to the elected officials in terms of policy objectives, but they come up with the recommendations because they're the ones that are out there and they know what their inventory is, what the situation is with the local governments, what can or can't be built, who is going to be financed, and what type of projects. And so I would encourage, your industry to get together and be that stakeholder working group for legislators, for folks in government. And so the more that you all come together in a cohesive group, the stronger your voices are to get certain bills passed. And we know that I think when Prop 64 was going to pass, many of the folks got together, right? And then after Prop 64 passed, some of the players fell off. There were fights. People started their own organizations, both federally and state and locally. And then the industry became fragmented again. And that's why I think we haven't had a lot of success passing bills at the legislative level, is because the industry hasn't come together. I think there were 22 dozen bills at the beginning of this year, and only 7 bills got to the governor's desk, and he only signed 5 of those bills. So that's what I would encourage for all of us to kind of get back together, get on the same page, prioritize what it is that is barriers and challenges to the industry, and then move forward together in a cohesive way during this next legislative session and try to get some of these bills passed that are important to all of us.
Great, thank you.
That's that I was just going to say to that's thank you so much for that, because that is something that has always been an issue. I remember in 2010, we went down to USC when it was Prop 19, and we had the Jack Herrera group, and we had the ASA, and we had all these different groups that were sitting in the room trying to pass a proposition, and there was fragmentation. And then when people get together, it definitely makes a difference. Here in the city, I want to pride ourselves in Long Beach. As the Long Beach Collective Association, as membership, we've been able to hold it together, and we've successfully lowered the taxes for all other type licenses from 6% to 1%. So that way we can kind of try to energize the industry, and that's such a key thing.
Well, I want to bring John into this. Maybe give us an update, kind of what's going on in your city, and I'd be curious to know, what has your reaction been or interaction been with organizations and groups like the League of Cities? I know that I've personally spoken to League of Cities and a couple of times, and it's a very mixed room in terms of who's supporting cannabis regulations, but certainly that organization and the local government piece of this is so vitally important to expanding access to legalized cannabis across the state. So what is your city doing, and what's that interaction been with the League of Cities?
Yeah, to answer your first second question first. We really haven't had, to my knowledge, any connection with the League of Cities. We've kind of gone about it a different way. So when Proposition 64 was passed in 2016, we passed a measure called Measure X. And Measure X allowed manufacturing, wholesale distribution, testing, and research and development in a particular zone at the northwest part of the city, which we call the green zone. It set a tax rate of 6%. And in order to apply for a permit, you had to pay a $50,000 permit processing fee. We ended up going through the process with 29 applicants that obtained permits. But the fact of the matter is, they for whatever reason, and a lot of it having to do with the high tax rate of 6%, have not been able to start operation. Right now, as we sit here 4 years later, we have only 13 operators that are in our system and only 9 from which we've generated taxes. In 2020, the year 2020, we were able to get just over $760,000 in receipts, and our budget was $1.14 million, so substantially under budget. So what we did is, after hearing from all of our people in that industry, we put together an ad hoc committee of the city council. It was me, Mayor Katrina Foley, and Manuel Chavez. And we really met with the operators and met with the people in the industry and drilled down on what they needed to become competitive. We brought it to the city council, and because we were allowed to do this under Measure X, we brought our tax rate down to 1%. We also noticed in that process, and we got information from HDL and others, that one of the main problems for the Measure X businesses is that they didn't have a retail channel, a go-to-market channel. We have a lot of consumers in Costa Mesa and the surrounding areas, and Santa Ana in Orange County is the only city that allows for legal retail and home delivery. So we not only brought down the tax rate for our Measure X businesses, but we decided to put on the ballot Measure Q, which is going on the ballot in this upcoming in November. And in doing that, what my idea was kind of similar to what Treasurer Marr said, is we need a working group. So we put together a group of people that were involved in the industry. I think, Adam, you were involved in that effort. Many others. There were about 20 people that met on Zoom calls, I think 4 or 5 times, to help the city craft Measure Q. And we also did some polling, and we came up with the conclusion that the appropriate tax rate is somewhere between 4% and 7%, and that's what's included in our Measure Q ordinance. So we're really looking forward to that. The city council has adopted a resolution supporting the ordinance. Of course, we, with the help of our the industry, we drafted the ordinance, and we're hoping after that we're going to be able to both stimulate growth through the lower tax rate of our Measure X business, but also move forward with a good, vibrant retail and delivery system. And the other thing we learned from Measure X as well is when you limit the real estate to such a small place, it jacks up the rents for the operators. So what we did with Measure Q is the entire zone of commercial, the entire commercial zone would be open to the Measure Q businesses. And hopefully that'll allow for a greater supply of real estate, and so that they don't have to pay, premium rents. We're just trying to make it competitive, provide a safe product to the people in Costa Mesa, and generate a new form of revenue, which we desperately need in this time for a lot of reasons, COVID being part of it, but also because of our prior dependence on sales tax and the change in the way people are buying products these days.
Yeah. So I guess to any of our operators, I mean, what is does that tax rate still sound too high? I mean, or I guess maybe now is a good time to maybe even kind of start talking about like what is, I guess, for an operator, and we'll just start with maybe on the retail side, like what's, you know, what's sustainable? I mean, I guess that's ultimately, if this substance is going to be taxed, which it is, it needs to be sustainable. You know, so what would either bring folks that are operating the illicit, the legacy market, illicit market, into the regulated market, and what would keep folks that are already there sustainable?
Well, I guess as the traditional market operator here, you know, if we're talking about like having these huge tax rates on the backs of patients, really, or even just, you know, people who are recreationally smoking, they're not really looking to pay anything more than what, you know, the sales tax is already supposed to be. I think most people are understanding of sales tax, but an added vice tax of any type, they're just going to go to the black market. People go to cookie stores or licensed stores in their area for the novelty effect of it. They're happy to see that it's there and that it's an option. And I'm sure that they patronize those places when they have to. But when they can, they're going to try and cut out the inflated tax rates, you know, whenever possible. I don't see that changing without bringing in more of the black market or the traditional market. When the people have less options of people that aren't collecting taxes, then they're going to be forced into the regulated market more. But that's why my first comment was, if we're going to be looking at regulation and trying to use all stick, we need to add a little bit of carrot there, and provide an avenue for that competition to join the regulated market and add to that tax base rather than take from it.
Yeah. Adam, gross receipts tax?
Yeah. There's a big sticker shock when it comes down to, and we see it all the time. And, you see an eighth that, for a typical eighth, it can go anywhere, like, historically, at certain times you go $45, $35, $45. And of course, there's a lot of strands and quality and a lot goes into it. But we get a lot of sticker shock when people come in because, it's not only was it because of COVID, but from before, these people still working 2 jobs, trying to make a living. They need cannabis in their life for whatever reason that they need it. And it is a very expensive habit at the rate of, $60 eighth when you're buying it at 45. So it obviously does forcefully almost, shy away certain consumers just because of their mere budgets and what they're used to when it comes to the traditional market. It is an issue because you can start from the beginning. We have the state cultivation tax. So then you have the cultivation tax that goes on into for a distributor, or it goes into a manufacturer that goes into the product. Then when the manufacturer turns it into a manufactured good, then certain cities, most cities, they're also taxing the manufacturer based on their gross receipts. Then the manufacturer goes to the distributor. Then when the distributor sells it to the retailer, there's also a distribution tax, and then there's an excise tax. Then us as a retailer, we're getting it with cultivation, manufacturing, distribution, all of these different taxes added up. And then we're paying for all those taxes and the excise tax. And then we're turning around and we're charging the city and state sales tax. And the very interesting thing, which is very important to know, is that these taxes are being compounded on top of each other. So the city tax has to go on top of the excise tax and all the other taxes. Then the state tax goes on top of the city tax. So we're taxing tax. It gets into a point where, besides the fact that it's highly taxed, it gets into a point where it's very hard to understand how to pay taxes. We have individual it's hard to pay taxes. You never had a group, because especially as you get more into the different licenses and now you're dealing with the full breadth of the taxes. And then the other caveat that comes on, for example, if you deliver something into another city, now that city is going to require potentially for them to pay their local tax, and then your city is also required for you to pay your tax. There's a disconnect. And I'm just laying out kind of a series of events of how the taxation goes. So when we literally see a product that comes in, we have 7 different taxes layered on it. Now that creates a lot of barriers for operators, because in order, you cannot break the market price. The market will break you first. It's not how it's going to work. Traditional market, listed market, it's there. At the end of the day, it's available. So we have to be as relevant as possible to those prices, which is impossible, but nonetheless, we try. And and there's a lot of disconnect. And then we talk a lot about pathways for mom and pop shops, social equity. We talk about all of those things are the same barriers. For the people that are well capitalized and able to do it are still having problems overcoming it, let alone a mom and pop or a social equity applicant to say. It does tie into it, and enforcement is important, but we're not going back to the war on drugs. There's smart ways of approaching, and from history, the best way to really combat, to say, an illicit market, 2 things is having a pathway for the operators to get into the market, and 2, making the legal market the stronger market, and people by default will just start coming to the legal. Then you can talk about smart enforcement outside of police, code enforcement, health department, fire department, different things that can come that doesn't require handcuffs and arrests. And that's a complicated process, but it's definitely multifaceted when it comes to the industry coming together, to say.
Yeah, can I also add, I know one of the big draws for Prop 64 and for people who are consumers is really the safety, right? When you buy from a licensed operator, it has to go through testing protocols. There has to be, proper labeling and disclosures. And I know that in Los Angeles, they were really starting to do that campaign. And I do think for us that we can all do that campaign. We don't have to wait for a marketing firm. We can all say, hey, if you're buying cannabis and you want safe cannabis, buy from a licensed distributor or a licensed retailer. But that also maybe requires some sort of marking, right? Like in Los Angeles, you have markings on your restaurants. So hey, this is an A restaurant, this is a B restaurant, right? And it does work. But right now, for an average consumer like myself, I don't know who is legal and who is illegal, right? I mean, they're open, you walk in there, you're not sure. And so I think as an industry, if we could develop some sort of, like Better Business Bureau, right? Or like, paying taxes to the state of California, or, tested, officially tested by labs, our products are tested safe. I think that is something that we can do as an industry without having to wait for a national marketing campaign or a statewide marketing campaign.
So one of the things I guess I've always struggled with is, do we need to move the operators in terms of like on the production side of this, or do we need to move the consumer into the regulated industry in order to have a larger regulated market? Do we need to control this on the production side, or do we need to really, bring more of the consumers into the fold? Because I think for me, one of the biggest potential pitfalls of kind of a regulated market that's followed by enforcement is a repeat on the war on drugs. And that seems to be like if there's one thing we can't do, we can't do that. It didn't work the first time, and it was incredibly just inhumane. And so, is there, I guess, to the group, what is it a mixture of both, or does it need to be led maybe more by the consumer, bringing more consumers into this industry, and we're really dealing with economics?
Well, hey, so Joe, this is the way I look at this is kind of going back to the basics that I learned when I was probably a freshman in college. I was a marketing major, and we used to learn about the 4 Ps: product, place, price, and promotion. And as the Treasurer Ma said, you know, we have an opportunity to have our legal operators deliver a high quality product that's tested from seed to sale, and they can count on that. And so we're, as a city government, relying on our operators to be able to deliver that. And then we talk about the place. You know, I don't know if you're familiar with Costa Mesa, but one of the places that we're going to have our shops is going right down Harbor Boulevard, right down Newport Boulevards, a section on Bristol, which is not too far away from South Coast Plaza or the camp or the lab. So having the shops on commercial corridors is going to be convenient and conspicuous for our consumers. And then we talked about price, and I do agree with the legacy operator that it is difficult. It's going to be difficult to actually certainly undercut or maybe meet someone who's not paying taxes, you know, an illicit operator. There is going to be some tax, and we need to have that. But we need to keep that as low as possible so we can get our ordinance passed, so that there's some taxes, but it's got to be reasonable and competitive, which is why we reduced our Measure X tax from 6 to 1. And finally, promotion. You know, with that ability to be legal, we have the ability to promote that product, and more than an illicit operator does when they have to kind of be in the shadows and they're chasing the enforcement efforts. So, I mean, I think we need to get back to basics to bring the consumers in to the legal market and show them the advantage, not just based on price, but based on other aspects that'll bring them to the legal market.
Hey, Joe, if I may, I would just point out that I think there's a big range in between what we're currently doing and going back to the war on drugs. At CDTFA, we've really made a big effort to treat the cannabis industry just like we would any other industry in the state of California. We administer 37 different tax and fee programs, many of which have pretty substantial taxes imposed on them. I mean, if you look to tobacco, the effective rate on cigarettes and other tobacco products is about 60%. And yet we've managed to get better compliance there through effective enforcement. And so I would just want to caution that we not look at this as sort of an all or nothing on the enforcement front, that there's still a lot of room to grow here. And it is still relatively new in California. I mean, adult use is less than 3 years old. I don't think anybody expected it would go incredibly smoothly, you know, right out of the gate. And we clearly are having some growing pains here, but I think added enforcement is certainly part of what's needed here. And on the tax front, not necessarily, it doesn't have to be necessarily a law enforcement matter, you know, hauling people in handcuffs, but it's simply not fair what's happening now, where certain people are paying and others aren't.
Absolutely. You know, if I could comment on is it the consumer, you know, is it the industry, is it the taxes, is it the policy, is it the education? I think it's a little bit of everything. It's not really it's not one thing that's going to get it over the hump to say. I think you know, consumers, to you know, the Secretary Treasurer's point, and a very important point, is the lab testing. Cannabis is one of the most highly tested products in the state of California. We have other agricultural products that fail when mixed with cannabis products, and we do wear that as a badge of honor. And there is also a very high cost to such a high lab testing action levels to say, but it's really, it's multifaceted, and it's all has to come together. Locally, we've been fortunate enough to work, and it took a while with the Long Beach Community College. We just launched the first class for Cannabis Industry 101 to do education to help inform people, understand the industry, so that way it's not just a thought of, it's just going to be easy. It's one of the hardest industries to be a part of and operate as a business. Also, looking at taxes, good policy, having less barriers to entry for the supply chain. I'll tell you, there's retail and there's everything else when it comes to, obviously other type licenses do have effects, like water, electricity, but retail has always been the biggest sticking point for cannabis because it's public facing. So, but the whole entire other industry, there's barriers. People don't want it on every single corner. People don't want too much. They want too little. There's a lot that goes into that, just like other uses. But the other type licenses, nobody technically will even know they're there if you're a cultivator or a manufacturer. You walk by these things, you would have no idea what's behind the doors. So having more accessibility to get into the industry with some of the costs, and I say this, and to Mr. Madura's point, which is 100%, alcohol, tobacco, 60%, alcohol, different stuff. These are these industries have been around for a very long time and have been taxed at those rates. It's matured, and they are fundamentally two different products with the benefits and what comes out of them. While we look to tobacco because it might be similar in the sense, but truly two different items. But the cannabis industry, maybe for at least the next 3 years, just to give it a little bit of time to just push it somehow, good policy, taxes, education, allow it to get its footing under, so that way it can kind of stand up, and then there can be a lot more conversation of how that goes. Plus, we'll have a lot more data to be able to track.
If I could maybe kind of pivot a little bit and ask a little bit of a technical question. Adam, you brought up other cities and this interaction between different local governments, and San Diego, not to throw them under the bus, but I will. They, I believe, unless something has changed, are at least attempting to collect a tax from distribution companies that are coming in to deliver products into San Diego dispensaries. Is that your understanding of it?
Yes, it is.
So how does that work? How does that work for the outside operator?
Well, I'll give you a live example of what happened with our location. So we got a letter from the city of Los Angeles saying that we must, if we do any business in the city, we must pay taxes. I sent it to the city ourselves. I'm like, hey, city, do we pay taxes here or do we pay taxes here? The response was, you need to take care of Long Beach, and we're not in charge of LA. You need to talk to kind of LA about that, to say. And then, we're not operating deliveries, we're retail mainly. So it wasn't an issue, but I can only imagine for others of how it's going to come. But this is also the same if I manufacture a product in Long Beach and I sell it in Los Angeles, or I buy a product from Los Angeles or San Diego and happens. And I'm not sure how that's working, to be honest with you. I'm not sure how that fit into the original framework to say, but there has been a lot of reports of that coming up more and more with a lot more question marks than answers.
Are these gross receipts taxes that LA is wanting?
Based on what type license you are. So if you're a delivery, then you need to pay the retail. If you're a manufacturer, you need to pay the manufacturer. If you're a distro, you need to pay the distro. Like I said, we haven't had that because we're not really doing all that, but I know a lot of other operators have been, trying to navigate that and understand how that works.
Yeah.
It's, something that's definitely been coming up, and that's just city from city,
Nick, is that something that the state could potentially provide clarity on? When we have one city saying, hey, you owe us, 5% of all the gross receipts for the sales that occur within our city. And then you have the city where it originated in saying, hey, you still owe us the 5% on the gross receipts. now this operator is looking at either paying one city and not the other, or paying 10% of gross on any given sale.
As long as they're within their constitutional prerogative to tax, they can set those. The state, and certainly my department doesn't have any authority over that. The only place we come in that transaction is for the sales tax. It would determine, we would collect the sales tax and send it to the jurisdiction based on several factors in state law in terms of which locality gets the sales tax for that transaction. Typically, if it's delivered, it'd be where it was delivered. But in terms of the local taxes and jurisdictions wanting to insist on their right to tax, that's not us.
John, has your city contemplated at all whether they would, go after outside deliveries? Are you guys only really looking to tax those industries or businesses within your jurisdiction?
Well, the plan for Measure Q, that's a great question. The plan for Measure Q, as I understand it, is the people that are licensed, the Measure X group will be able to deliver if they get a license to do so. So they're already in our green zone, and they will be able to deliver, and we'll tax them. The Measure Q businesses will have the ability to have a storefront, but also deliver their product, and we'll be able to tax them. I'm reasonably confident that we're not taxing people from outside the city that are delivering into the city, just because that's just kind of impossible to police. I don't know even how we would do that. We have no idea. Somebody from Mission Viejo who's delivering a product into Costa Mesa, we wouldn't even know that they were doing that.
I guess the entirety of it just really makes me think that the entire tax structure needs to be overhauled top to bottom for cannabis. There almost needs to be a comprehensive conversation with locals, with the state, and the industry to really kind of figure this out. Otherwise, you're going to have businesses, that are really, again, just in an unsustainable position. Maybe this is something that the industry can kind of really coalesce around moving forward next year. We do have certainly some folks at high levels of government that are willing to listen to us, like State Treasurer Ma, who's done more than just listen and act. But this is really a bit of a mess. Back to, I guess, maybe our anonymous legacy market operator. It's just been a while since I've purchased anything on the illicit market. What are prices on the within the illicit market kind of these days for, I'll just use the proverbial quality eighth, and how does that compare to what's at the licensed dispensaries? Might have lost them.
Hey, Joe, can I just comment on what you just said? Because it was very, very kind of pessimistic and sad in a way in your delivery. And I just want to pep you up a little bit, so if that were true, that we are in this kind of spiral and we're never going to get out of it unless there's a huge tax reform, then I don't believe that we would have so much enthusiasm in the industry about Measure Q and coming in to Costa Mesa into the kind of legal retail and delivery space. And the 4 to 7% tax rate was, I would say, unanimously kind of, there was consensus around that range with the operators that were in our working group. And they're anxious to apply and anxious to move into this space. The other thing is, you know, what we learned when we went through the process of reducing our tax for Measure X is that it's not just taxes, there's other issues in the industry. We mentioned, somebody mentioned 280E, which we haven't talked about here, but that's a tremendous, you know, hit to the bottom line profitability of these businesses that can be dealt with at the federal level. But also they don't have the go-to-market supply channel. And so through measures like Measure Q, through operators that move forward and create this supply channel, I think you're going to see, you know, more, I don't know, we'll see, time will tell, but more activity in the industry, more opportunity in the industry. And then perhaps with some reforms on the federal level, we'll be able to get rid of 280E. And then, you know, yes, should we look at all these other taxes? Sure, but there's other challenges that these businesses are facing that need to be addressed. And I can tell you that, you know, it's kind of like, it would be difficult. It would be a very, very heavy lift in Costa Mesa and most other cities to be able to say to the community, we want you to vote for retail and home delivery, but there's going to be no additional local taxes. I mean, I just don't think that was part of our polling. Part of our polling assumed that there would be revenue to the city above and beyond our sales tax. And I don't think it would pass. So that's a constraint that we have in terms of creating a market for this product. Ultimately, it's the voters that we need to appeal to. It's the voters and the consumers, and we can't go anywhere without them.
And why did your city elect to go with a gross receipts tax over a sales tax?
The gross receipts tax over the sales tax, we have a gross receipt tax. We have the normal sales tax, for which we get about 1%. And then we added the gross receipts tax, which is kind of like what you might call our excise tax. And we did that because A, we want to develop that revenue, and B, we want to have it to be appealing to the voters. So we actually have in our ballot initiative, on the ballot that you can read when you're looking in your ballot box, it says the estimate will be $3 million annually in taxes on the excise tax. Santa Ana, the number that they're getting annually, currently after many more years of developing their industry, is about 10 million. So when we talk about this out in the community, we say this is going to bring between $3 and $10 million in addition to whatever the added sales tax would be. And that's appealing to the voters. And it was acceptable to the people like Adam and others that participated in our working group.
And just, Joe, as a matter of just a technical detail, cities can't impose their own separate sales tax on items outside of the state construct. So that's why cities are find themselves looking at these other tax methodologies.
So they can't tax a specific product, but they can increase their sales tax, just not on a specific good.
They can increase their sales tax up to 2% over the 7.25% rate without going to the ballot. I mean, well, even that requires a ballot, and those are sort of special district taxes. This gets very confusing, but those would apply to all tangible personal property. They can't adjust the rate for the sales tax rate for a specific product, and they certainly wouldn't be able to add a 6% sales tax.
Um, well,
You know, Joe, if I was just going to say to the, to John's point, and John, let me say something. You guys have been awesome. The city, what you guys have done over there and getting it going, I think, has been a true leadership, especially in Orange County, to move things forward. And to the doom and gloom part of things, it is a little weird. It's always a tough thing. I will tell you something. We are the cannabis industry and we always make it happen. We've always made it happen. We'll figure it out. And more today, more than ever, we've had great communications with so many great leaders, that are on this panel today and that are not, that are open to the conversation. So that just does give us a sign of, continuous progress. And we're definitely going to be able, looking at it 10 years ago, having this conversation today, right now, would have seemed completely crazy. Have a college course, completely crazy, So there's progress being made. On the tax front, to the treasurer's point, the industry should get together and we should have the conversations. I don't know if we scrap the whole thing and start all over, or I don't know if we would take a real look and, see what we can do, or just to at least get the market kind of more where the legal market should be and needs to be. But something should be looked at it. And during these tough times and COVID and deficits and issues, it makes it even harder on both sides, because you have the state needs funds, but yet the people themselves are running out of funds because of all the crisis that's happening. So it's like it's a catch-22. Do you go over here and push more, or do you go to the top and figure it out? I think, but we should continue to invest in the industry. It will come back, and the tax base will widen eventually, and it will be a great resource just alongside of other commodities, hopefully, in the state.
yeah. Just would want to underscore one thing that that Adam just said, and that John is absolutely a leader within the broader Orange County area. The fact that they are doing this right now speaks volumes to their leadership, because certainly cannabis can be a very scary issue at the local level. All you got to do is look around and see how many cities haven't yet licensed cannabis, because they're, I think, still in large part afraid of what it looks like in their community. You do the research, you do the deep dive on it, and you find out that cannabis, A, is already in your community, and B, when you regulate it, it's not scary at all, and it can be ad valorem to your city, to its culture, to the community as a whole. So, John, really want to thank you for really kind of being the tip of the spear of a controversial topic in Orange County. But I think your leadership on it is going to go a long ways. And what you're going to find out is that it's not scary, and you're going to have a whole bunch of cities right behind you saying, you know what, if they can do it, so can we. So
I hope that's true. But in the meantime, I hope everybody comes to Costa Mesa to buy their cannabis.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to have to hope very hard. I think you guys open up some retail in Costa Mesa, and you're going to see lines down the block, and from people driving for quite a ways to come to your city. Orange County is still, there's not a lot of legal cannabis options down there yet. So. Any other kind of final thoughts from the group? We've got a few more minutes to wrap up. Our anonymous legacy operator has been quiet for a little bit. Want to give him a chance to kind of share any more thoughts on what brings the other regulated or unregulated folks into the industry.
Well, yeah, I just read that comment about the industry going to areas of the state that have lower taxes. It used to be, in the unregulated time, the large dispensaries were the ones that were duking it out for market share, and now it almost seems like it's more of of a municipality competition that's going on. Bringing in more of the legacy operators, like I said, you really get, it's a two-edged sword. Obviously, the tax rate needs to come down. The consumers aren't going to seek out those operators that are forced to charge 8, 9, 10%. That's just not going to be an option. And then also the responsible legacy operators need to be given a pathway forward. There's a lot of municipalities that are, yes, they are open for licensed operations, or beginning to be, but the amount of licenses that they're offering up doesn't reflect the population centers, or or the licenses are being, the licensing process is being manipulated by city councils or county supervisors in their own benefit in some cases. A lot of times it may not be in their own benefit, but they're trying to exclude local operators and trying to bring in, out of town large businesses. All of that's going to be a problem, especially with that last case of trying to exclude local legacy operators in lieu of large companies like MedMen or other big chains. The people already have established relationships with those legacy operators that have been serving their needs for a decade or more in some cases. You really are going to have to reach out to those people and prevent that from happening, because there is loyalty there, and you're not going to have to really the state treasurer brought up testing, and that would be a incentive for people to join the licensed dispensaries in lieu of a legacy operator. And the amount of money that they're going to pay in the taxes, and the fact that the person that they've been going through for 10 years is not able to have a pathway for a license. I just see a lot of those people sticking with where they're at. You're able to produce 6 plants per person, I believe. Cultivate 6 plants in the state per person. If you grow 6 big plants, you can still service a small but loyal circle of customers. So we may not have large operators that are outside the legal market, but you'll start seeing more people cultivate for themselves. So really, I think the stick versus the carrot on enforcement versus a pathway forward for the legacy operators, I think that's going to be huge. And I don't know if they have plans on trying to loosen up the licensing process for certain local operators or not, but I think that's going to be a huge path forward to include people rather than exclude people.
Joe, I just want to say one thing about what was just said. And we actually did, in our polling that we did for Measure Q, we asked the specific question of whether there should be a pathway or whether there should be an exclusion for local operators who were, operating illicit shops. And it was very, very strong in our polling that the respondents wanted a pathway and did not want there to be exclusion. So we interpreted that as backing up what was just said, that the consumers do have loyalty to their local shops where they've, illicit shops, whatever you want to say, where they've received their product for these years.
Yeah. I'm not sure some of the, necessarily indoor cultivators or manufacturers are going to have some of that same loyalty to those jurisdictions, though. As other cities come online and lower that tax rate, if that business can relocate that manufacturing facility to improve their bottom line, I think we'll see them to start do that. If you want an example of it happening in the past, you just have to look at the state's enterprise zone program, where we where the state created enterprise zones to attract jobs to rural or low-income communities. And what happened was basically just kind of moved Walmart shipping centers around for a good decade, you know, to no real net benefit to the state. And you know, that I think will be a consequence of local governments eventually adopting lower taxes, because they ultimately want the thousands of jobs that this industry has created and has brought to the state. So, anyone else? Nick, any final thoughts on this topic? Are you maybe willing, if we can kind of pull together I won't say a broad discussion that includes legislators, maybe State Treasurer Ma, if she's willing to participate, some industry folks, and I think what we also need to bring is the League of Cities into this conversation. Is that something that you or your office might be willing to kind of participate in, even if it's just a discussion as to like, here's how this is all kind of currently working within the industry?
Of course, we're, you know, I would say a few things. We're happy to participate in that. We also do have a cannabis tax advisory committee that meets quarterly. If anybody's interested, they should also reach out to us if they'd like to be part of that. And I saw in the Q&A that there's some tax questions specifically, and questions about maybe when product's been stolen or that sort of thing. I would encourage people to look at our cdtfa.ca.gov website. A lot of those questions have come up already. We have specific guidance out for the cannabis industry related to those topics and others. And I would just encourage people to look there. If you need additional assistance, you can reach out to me. You can reach out to your local CDTFA office. You know, you know, taxes are complicated, but they're, you know, we're here to help people comply. I mean, that's at the end of the day, we want people to comply. So I would just say we're happy to work with anybody who wants to figure out a way to do this and bring more people into the legal market. We're happy to work with them.
Well, I see Susan, are we out of time?
If anyone else wants to give their final remarks, we can go into the commercial.
I'll jump in real quick. I want to say thank you for everybody on this panel. John, thank you. You know, Nicholas, Joe, everybody, thank you so much. To be in this space and have these conversations is always great. And glad, Susan, State of Cannabis is awesome what you do. So thank you so much for everything that, you know, bringing everybody together. So definitely look forward to more conversations, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam.
I just want thank you for the opportunity to speak. Remember Measure Q, if there's any way you could support that. Also, I'm running for re-election. So it's Stevens for the word for CostaMesa.com. You could check that out. And so thank you for having this opportunity and for all the participation of the panelists.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, Susan, for all that you do.
Thank you, Joe.
Love the discussion. There's obviously, I think, a lot of work to be done left in this space. You know, the gross receipts tax for the cannabis industry is tough, right? I mean, a 5% gross receipts tax makes that city, you know, 10, 12, 15% partner in your business, basically. You know, and on top of all the other taxes, it makes it really difficult to kind of make those ends meet. You know, those taxes also aren't great on the production side of things. So I'm really looking forward to you know, maybe being able to pull together a broad kind of group that includes some of the mod Dems at the state, as well as our, some of other elected officials like Treasurer Ma, to really kind of have a holistic conversation of what should the tax rate be and where should those taxes be placed. Let's bring the locals into this and let's fix it. I'm not pessimistic about getting it fixed. Adam, you're right. The cannabis industry, it's figured it out before. It's going to figure it out again. It's always going to be here. And it will get done. Hopefully there's just not going to be, too much pain along the way until it's all sorted out. But thank you so much for allowing me to be part of this.
Yeah, and thank you, Nicholas. I know one thing that you said during our practice session that really struck me was you kept saying, look, we're just implementing what the voters were sold. And that's absolutely true, and you're doing your job. I think that maybe we sold the voters the wrong thing, and maybe it's time for a little bit of a do-over. But thank you guys for this discussion.